castle shit. When I saw that, I was like, it had like a little box on top of the little lever thing. And,
Right. I've seen some videos of like weird, like the complicated arranged magnet spinning thing that he has. Like,
Yeah, the flywheel.
The flywheel with magnets.
It's like a row of magnets, a wheel of magnets, and then outside of that wheel that spins, like sort of the carriage that wheel's in, is another row of magnets, circle of magnets. And by spinning it, you can generate some type of friction that can be stored and harnessed.
Of course, we have no idea how exactly.
to do it, yeah.
Right.
But it's some
some
crazy
people
shit.
do.
Look at it.
Some people do.
Well, obviously, right. Some people do.
The mace.
who don't
Is
actually
this
share
like
it.
ancient technology?
This is just like what,
Stone.
20s?
That, yeah.
I mean, yeah, it looks
30s.
steel and stuff.
30s, and then I think he moved it maybe in the 40s or...
So like, not only did he like make the rocks and stuff, but like he's a metallurgist. Apparently, he can work with metal and create all these fucking like everything. What?
He came over with like barely any money.
You said you bought his 2 books?
Yeah.
Irishman, right?
Sorry?
Irishman, who's from...
No, he was Latvian or maybe Estonian, but I think he was Latvian, which is like, you know, right next to Russia, pretty much.
You said he came to Florida to do it specifically. Why?
The story is that he had like this girlfriend that was like 16.
Oh,
So
yikes.
he was like, yo, I gotta, you know, switch countries real quick. But,
What?
No, but she actually broke up with him, supposedly. But it's all very allegorical, because the way that he talks about it is like she was 16 years old when they were supposed to get married. She rejected him. So he was like heartbroken and he got sick. And he had like pneumonia, tuberculosis, TB. And he always used TB, Tom Brady, Tampa Bay.
Hey.
But he always used TB to like say tuberculosis. So people will just think that's very suspect, because it's like, it could be standing for something else.
True. So how is the 16-year-old girlfriend symbolic?
Because he called her his sweet 16. And he like exclusively referred to her as that. And then he would etch that into stuff and use it as like, people think it's code. People are pretty sure that it's code.
Right, there's codes all over the Coral Castle.
Yeah, he was like 60 years old and still talking about like this girl from middle school, and it makes no sense. And why her? She's never going to see it. She's never going to hear about this museum, you know, this castle. But I actually haven't covered this in my channel because we actually know when it was built, because it wasn't
right.
there,
It's not your stick.
There. Yeah.
You
So
go
it
for the
is-
questionable stuff.
Yeah. It's not. People say that like, was the Coral Castle there? I can without a doubt say that the Coral Castle was created when Ed Leedskalnin created it.
Right, and we kind of have some documentation in the
Why would
form
they
of
even question
photos.
that?
And he moved it. So did you guys know that?
What? That wasn't the original location?
That's the craziest
What?
part.
But he moved it in the exact same pattern?
In the night.
Oh my
Nobody
god.
watching.
So he came over from Latvia, right?
Right.
Because he was sick. He moves to Florida. Well, first, I think he went up to like Pennsylvania or something. She was like searching all of America, like, and people think that he might have been dowsing, which is where like you hold the rods, and you're pretty much like psychic, like the rods are
If they
guiding
cross
you.
or whatever.
And this is how the guy that found the Book of Mormon, that started the Mormon religion, that's what he was doing when he found it.
Really?
So maybe he was a fraud, maybe he wasn't. But people use it with success. And they used to use it to find wells. To like,
Yeah, I've done it
well
before
water.
in my house. It's
Yeah.
not
It's not
a
crazy.
fake thing. It's just about the Earth's magnetism. That's it.
Exactly. Well, you know, there's the mainstream scientific community would say that it is complete bullshit. But
Well,
I
people,
agree
this because
with you.
people try and call it witch rods and stuff
Yeah.
like that. It's really, you don't have to go that far, man. It's just magnetism.
I agree with you.
I've seen them use it with like ghost hunters and shit like that, so I don't know how that would relate.
Exactly. I mean, there's a lot of reasons maybe why those things could cross, but like in this case, in Edward Leedskalnin's case, it's definitely about magnetism. It should be.
He's literally like, there's no, like, some of his stuff is codes, like some of those keywords, like the Sweet 16. And Billy Idol went there, the musician, and he like toured it, and then he made a song called Sweet 16. So it's like, he might be in on the secret too, you know. But
That's weird. That's very weird.
so he made it up north of Miami, if I'm not mistaken. He made it north of Miami, and then all the coral, like, you know, 3/4 of like what's there today was built in a different location. And these rocks are, you know, as big, if not bigger, than most of the stones used in the pyramids. Some of them are like, you know, 20 feet tall, long. It's insane. So he cut these out of the ground himself, put them up, you know, stuck them according to the stars too. So not only are they just like brought out of the ground, which is impressive enough, they're aligned to the stars, just as the pyramids were, the ancient temples and all that stuff.
Astronomically.
I want to
Yes,
know where he got
Stonehenge.
like this inspiration to do this from. Like,
People think that he was a Mason. Masons go there as a part of their... It's like field trips for the Masons. They go there.
I bet they do.
And I'm not saying they're involved or not involved in anything, but they do go there in field trips, like groups at a time, and they can be seen there all the time and observing. And so that is a clear connection between the two. Like, they appreciate his work a lot.
Whether he was a Freemason or not, he's
Yeah.
definitely drawing from the same body of knowledge
Absolutely.
that would attract them there to look at it and observe it.
Some people say that his father was one of the men that helped build the country that he came from. And after, you know, things fell apart with like all the revolutions and communism in Eastern Europe around that time, that his, you know, sort of creations were getting destroyed, and the family legacy was destroyed. And he was a very short guy, by the way.
I remember
he was
really small. Like,
He was literally like 5'0". So, you know, there used to be giants in the world. A lot of people are saying, well, there used to be like these hobbits, like these dwarves, and people that were like cave people, like, you know, industrious, like workers that were just, you know, specialized for something else. And people think that because he's that short, and he looks weird, he looks like an alien kind of, that people think he is, has some of this DNA maybe, like this old elf or, you know, troll dwarf DNA. That's not like midget dwarf, but it's, you know, whatever used to be here before humans became the
All right.
things they are. So
So here we are on the
did it.
PalmWave podcast.
highly anticipated guest here.
We got Mr. Dr. Narco Longo here on YouTube, and he's on Instagram, and he makes videos about, well, why don't you tell us what you make videos about?
unexplained Florida history. Who might have been here before Columbus, you know? Everyone likes to admit, oh yeah, Juan Ponce de Leon, Columbus, oh, they were terrible people, like they enslaved and killed, but then no one questions what they were doing. Like, they just expect, like, oh yeah, they were telling the truth about everything when they got here. And all of, you know, I'm going to answer the question, but you know, Florida's history is very much Spanish history, and before that we don't really know anything. And they tell us there may not have even been, you know, that many people up until right before the Spanish got here. So there's not even much ancient history in Florida.
Right, they try to say that the native or the indigenous that were here was very sparse.
Yes. And the ones that, as when the Americans got around after the Spanish had left, there was 0 of those original natives left. So the Seminoles and people like that, the Creek, the Seminole, the Miccosukee, that we associate with Florida today, they're not even from Florida. They're from Oklahoma. They got pushed down, similar to like the Trail of Tears type thing. They got pushed down to Florida, or they escaped, ran away.
So what made you start looking at this?
We learned a lot of Florida stuff in school.
Yeah.
And I've talked about it on the other podcast. I had like a experience when I was younger, you know, like a psychedelic experience and a UFO experience in the same year. And that kind of got me on the path.
You had a psychedelic experience?
Yeah.
Psychedelic
well, it wasn't
experience happened
psychedelic.
to-
I would call it more of a near-death I got squirted in my both eyeballs with toad poison.
Oh.
And it's one of
the toad poison?
These bufo toads that like people
Yes.
do to get high.
Yep.
Whatever.
Wild.
So that was kind of an initiatory experience. And then I saw a UFO with some friends when I was about 15.
In Florida?
In Florida. In St. Andrew's School over here in Boca Raton. And on like they have like this golf course grass, like big open field.
We'll save the UFO story for the end because we normally ask every guest that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So we'll save that for the end.
Yeah.
But okay, so you just those experiences happened to you and you started asking more questions?
I was just into a lot of conspiracy theories.
I think you said that just as you started, studying all these theories and stuff and everything, how everything is connected. I think you said somehow it just kept coming back to Florida.
A lot of stuff did. Especially a lot of people say like follow the money, follow the money.
True.
Well, the money always comes down to Florida.
That makes sense.
Once they retire.
That's true. That's
so
true.
Rockefeller, Ford, Edison, Plant, Flagler, all of the people that you see that were in the newspaper being labeled like robber barons and industrialists and capitalists, the worst people in American history, that fathered in the industrial age that tore down all the great forests, got rid of all the old clean technology and replaced it with dirty, expensive technology, filling up your gas with the same engine that it used 100 years ago in the Model T with little to no innovation. If you have a Tesla, great, but that's still getting charged by electricity that's being produced most likely by fossil fuels or some type of combustive gas somewhere else. So we're really not, we're just like burning cheap, dirty fuel. And before that, it's pretty evident we had something else. It was probably a lot of water-based technology, like the Niagara Falls turbines were there before Tesla got there, and his job was just to fix them.
What do you mean? You're saying Nikola Tesla? I didn't know he was involved with those dams up there.
Yeah, he had to fix or make more efficient one of these electrical turbines they had, where the water comes down and the pressure from the dam spins these turbines that powers the cities. So that was going on a long time ago, and people in this Tartarian sphere of knowledge, this old world stuff, they'll say that may have been there for hundreds of years.
All right. So let's backtrack a little bit. You're saying that all these people came down to Florida, the bringers of capitalism. They built whatever, Florida, Flagler, Plant, etc., Rockefeller. You said that they came here to build supposed stuff, build over the old technology, and you're supposing that this was part of a Tartarian empire. So what is this Tartarian empire, and what kind of technology do we think they had?
Well, when people say Tartarian, like Tartaria was a place in Russia, China area. When we say it today, that's not really what I'm referring to. I'm referring to this civilization, this era that was after Atlantis, but before our industrial age.
So you're supposing that there was something after Atlantis before us.
Yes. So it wasn't the great pyramid builders of the ancient world, but it was an in-between. It was a buffer between us that has like no conception of the stars and who we are and what we're doing, how to build stuff that lasts. Our houses fall apart after 20 years.
So let's back up one more time. When do we think that Atlantis was around?
Atlantis?
Because we've got Plato, we've got Solon, we have legends.
Yes, there's many interpretations, and I think Atlantis is, for a fact, you can call it the Atlantic Ocean. That's where the name comes from. You have Atlanta, Georgia. You have Lantana, Florida. You have, Atlantic Beach up in New Jersey. You have it down here. So that is Atlantis. Now, as far as what was there maybe a continent in the middle that sank, or did the sea levels rise, making it appear like stuff was sinking? That very well could have happened.
So when was this?
Definitely at the end of the last ice age.
So that's
pretty much where everything starts popping up, like agriculture, civilization, and that is 15 to 10,000 years ago,
Okay.
around there.
So when the Ice Age ended, that's when Atlantis sunk.
Some people think that the is in Atlantis means ice, so
True.
that it means all the land is ice, meaning that up around the polar area, which used to be the capital of the world, of the pagan empire before the church, the North Pole was warm and tropical.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like mango, banana, coconut. And before we tilted or wobbled or whatever, happened, it froze around the North Pole. So that would be the Ice Age to those people. But then in the tropical regions, it was flooding like crazy.
Yeah, I heard that from Randall Carlson that, the Ice Age wasn't so uniformly frozen, that there were
No.
still large areas on Earth that were not.
It was mainly Europe and North America, like the United States, Europe, and like Russia, Siberia was mainly the frozen parts. Down beneath, especially beneath the equator, it was still hot. It was still warm. There was just a shit ton more water,
Yeah.
and we're still stuck with those raised sea levels today.
Right. So by whatever cataclysms happened, Atlantis fell, and did members of Atlantis move on to create what is the Tartarians, or?
So the Atlantean people is where the European race comes from.
Okay.
Like white people, for lack of a better word. Dark-skinned people come from Lemuria.
And that's over like the Pacific.
That's over by the Pacific. And that's the same deal. So remember, it's not one or the other. Some people try and pit them against each other.
Okay.
We're saying that, water was introduced by whatever happened, and the sea levels rose, meaning that if there was land in the Pacific that was lower than what's sea level today, that would be gone and sunk. And the same happened in the Atlantic. So Lemuria is where you get the Moors.
Mm.
And the Moors are these other people
That's such a mind fuck.
that are...
Because they're in the Pacific, but how?
Well, they came to Florida on the west coast. Sorry, not Florida. They came to America on the west coast of America. And these are like the Olmecs.
Mm-hmm.
The Olmecs of Mexico and like the Caribbean, South America. The Maya a little bit. Those are clearly dark-skinned people
For sure.
in their paintings and stuff. So they were over here too, near the Atlantic. But their origin is not Atlantis, which is probably in the North Atlantic Ocean, which is in the Azores today.
Right,
Off the
that
coast
shelf.
of Spain.
Yeah.
In the Azores, they have these orange-haired... They were orange. So, like, blonde is kind of like a mixture of where that original orange is gone. These are like the tall as fuck, orange-headed giants.
Mm-hmm. So I didn't know they had them in the Azores. Wow.
And these were the only people that had beards on the planet. Every other... And this is... Follow the beards. And this is where you get the word barbarian.
because they had beards.
Barber means hair, to cut your hair. Barber
Right.
means beard, if you speak a little Spanish.
Yes.
Right. So
Barbado.
you have Barbados, you have barbarians. So in Africa, they called people barbarians
Mm-hmm.
because they were Romans. Well, the Romans also called the Nordic people to the north of them barbarians. So barbarian isn't one group of people.
I thought it came from like the language. It was basically prejudice against other languages. Other languages to the west are like bar 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 bar, and all the languages to the east
That's
sound
what
like
the-
tar 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 tar.
That's a good hypothesis.
I mean, I don't know where I heard that
I haven't
from.
heard that before, but that's good. It is, you're right though, it is the same root, like Barber and Tartar are the same thing.
Hmm.
And Tartar is all the empires east of Rome, because we have a Roman history, whether we like it or not. Rome writ our history. So everyone east of Rome are Tartars. And so those people don't call themselves Tartar very often, but they all get labeled as Tartars from the Roman perspective. The barbarians, you have black barbarians in North Africa, and then you have white barbarians up in Germany. Well, the Romans call them both barbarians because they don't care. So it was like a thing, like they considered themselves the most civilized society. That's not true. But it had to do with beards. Because the Atlantean people, deposited most of their DNA. Well, they're from the North Pole initially, so that's why they mix with the Vikings, and you get that Viking blood. Then they came to North Africa, and they were the Phoenicians. And the Phoenicians.
Let's slow down. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So the Moors are from Lemuria, and they came across the Pacific, or however, through to the west coast of the United States. And so then how do they progress to how do they get to Africa?
No,
because your theories are that the Moors built a lot of what is old Florida.
Yes.
So they would have come from the west coast, and
they would have the same Moors that were in San Francisco, because the native Californians, when you look this up, the native Californians were like dark-skinned people, or they're not native, but they're before the Europeans that got here. So there was a lot of races here. The whole world, and that's another misconception, is that just because they were more primitive and had wooden ships and wooden, doesn't mean they weren't traveling.
Right.
All continents. Like the Phoenicians, they could travel the open seas very easily. And we have people that have taken Phoenician boats from Africa, North Africa, and they landed it in Fort Lauderdale.
Recreated Phoenician style ships.
They recreated it with a Phoenician ship, like a completely original Phoenician ship. And it was like a 3-man crew. They would have had like 16 guys.
A couple of Phoenician ship. I want to see what it looks like.
What time period was the Phoenicians?
So the Phoenicians were predecessors. We don't know how far back they go because
it's kind of obscure, right?
They never wrote down their history.
They kind of bleed into prehistory.
We're told they didn't write down a lot of their history, and then they were also the enemies of the Greeks and the Romans. So the Greeks were, 1000 BC to 500 BC, around there. It's like their heyday.
It was basic.
I just wanted to see what it looked like.
They look like Viking ships, and that's the connection that no one puts together, is that the only two people in the ancient world who could travel the open seas were the Vikings and the Phoenicians. The Greeks were too afraid to leave the Mediterranean Sea because they always had to keep a visual aid. Like the coastline, they'd have to keep the coastline within view or else they'd get lost because they didn't know how to read the stars like Phoenicians.
So the Phoenicians are, super ancient, and they basically were the pioneers of astronomical sea travel.
Absolutely.
Using the stars to navigate, et cetera, et cetera. But they also did a lot of other things. In your other podcast, you mentioned etymology. Etymology is super powerful. Let's go down the road of etymology when it comes to the Phoenicians.
Yeah. So when we talk about language, you use two words. Etymology is like the tracing of how a word, was molded over time and has these gradual shifts from old language or a different language. And etymology is just tracing a word's root down through root words. Phonetics, which comes from the word Phoenician, because the Phoenicians introduced the first alphabet. So alpha, beta, A, B, that's the nickname for the alphabet, is the first two letters. The Phoenicians came up with that. So ever since they taught the Hebrew, ancient Hebrew Israelites, the alphabet, they taught the Greeks the alphabet. The Greeks taught the Romans, and the Romans taught the French, and then the English. English is the oldest language on the planet, though.
Because it's an evolved form of Phoenician.
Yes, exactly. Because it's a maritime. It doesn't belong to England.
Let's bring up Venice.
It doesn't belong to England. And Venice, too. Venice was a sea power, too. They had, no land power.
They were the trading power. They were a merchant republic.
And Venice, if you know your phonetics, that's the same word as phonetics, but if you know your phonetics, Venice is Phoenicia.
Venetia in Italian.
Venice. Exactly.
Phoenicia,
Crazy, bro.
Venetia. And I think you said that the North Africans even spelled it with a PH instead of a V.
I think you might be right. Yeah.
Well, I'm quoting you. I better be right.
Well, Phoenicia is spelled with a PH. And Venetian which you have Venetian in Florida, a lot of Venetian like references
Right.
to Venice, like Venetian Causeway.
Right, the Venetian Causeway. That one picture that you put with the elephants crossing the Venetian Causeway. I was like, wow, how symbolic.
Yeah.
They're just flaunting it right in front of our faces.
And I had a really good. I talk really sideways, so yeah,
No worries.
good job reeling me like back
try.
in. But with the elephants, I had a good comment from one of my subscribers. You know, I should give him credit. I forgot his name, but such a good comment. In Sarasota, supposedly, which is where the Ringling brother, John Ringling, created a Venetian mansion.
Yeah,
It's
I've
like
seen it,
it's
seen it.
glorious, right? And there are some pictures of it getting constructed, but it shows like a 3/4 of the way done, you know, house. So who knows?
The connection between the Phoenicians and the Moors. Does that start in Carthage,
Yeah.
which is
Yes.
a North African
Yes.
competitor to Rome at the time, right?
Yeah. You know your history. Good job.
Thanks.
Yeah, the Phoenicians originally were these like tall, orange-haired people, and we know that they were so tall because the Phoenicians and the Scythians are the same people. The Scythian were like the cavalry; they were like the nomadic like horse riders,
The steppe archers.
and exactly, and then the Phoenicians were like the navy, and they would be the traders that were like the merchant class that was out. They were literally like bringing corn from South America like over to Egypt, you know, and that's how the Egyptians got cocaine and tobacco.
That's very curious.
That is no.
Those are New World plants.
That's no conspiracy theory. Too.
Shouldn't be there.
They've literally found cocaine and tobacco in like mummies, like they died like with a like a blunt and like coke on their lips.
So where'd they get that from?
And then the Egyptologists are like, no, like nothing to see here. Like, don't worry about it. But they have cocaine and tobacco in these mummy burials, so they know someone went across, and it wasn't the Vikings that went across the ice. It wasn't Pacific Islanders that like followed the kelp forest. It was like an empire that came here, and we don't have any remnants of them because they were the absolute enemy of the Roman Catholic Empire, and the Spanish conquistadors that came here were like fanatical Catholic mercenaries for the most part, willing to kill and do whatever because that's what they were told to do. And when they came here, they encountered like many different groups and races and types, like light-skinned, dark-skinned. And they wrote about how when they came, they were offered gifts. Christopher Columbus came, and the people greeted him with like fucking jewelry and like baskets of fruit. And within like a couple days, he literally writes in his notebook, so I decided we're just going to enslave them all. And
Oh my god!
like, and so then they have like full suits of armor. These guys have like loincloths. Who knows? That's what we're told generally. But so it wasn't a hard battle. But so that's another thing. Some of them were like these tribal native, you know, guys with loincloths in the woods. But then some of these guys, the Timucua, that they were meeting up with when they got here, the French met up with them too, and they were a little bit more North Florida. These guys, no joke, like 8 feet tall. The Spanish accounts, I have it on my Instagram if you want me to show you them.
Yep.
There are these pages, some of the earliest accounts of Florida, and that's these guys talking about how they were like attending a feast with these native Timucua, and they were 1.5 feet, that's a quote, 1.5 feet taller than the average, or their tallest man. This tallest Spanish guy, the native chief, was 1.5 feet taller. And we have these
I mean, they talk about finding giants like all over the world, though. Like in
yeah, they're everywhere. So Florida's not special in that regard. But you know, they're here, and I'm sending you right now this elongated skull that probably belonged to a giant.
And this was found on the Florida coast. That's so crazy.
And they try and say, and there's another one that they found, and they try and say that it's Peruvian because they know they have those in Peru. They say that they're skull binding, where they like strap the head with like rubber bands pretty much and make it grow weird.
They do the same thing as some African tribes.
That's what they say.
But there's a difference.
Yeah.
We there's a lot of these skulls, right?
Yeah.
We know we've found skulls, I'm pretty sure that we know for a fact were binded. We got a whole selection of these. And they are just markedly different than these right here.
Yeah, they are.
We can tell that those other skulls were originally normal and manipulated. This looks different.
Yeah.
So it's almost like they were trying to emulate these people.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. That's kind of how science will work, is if they'll find native that maybe are emulating what they learned or saw from a previous generation civilization, and then they'll just use that to discount any pictures or ancient depictions of
Yeah, man, the long skulls ain't a joke, people.
yeah.
People look like that.
But as far as Atlanteans, we have Atlanteans here in I can prove Atlanteans in Florida, the Wendover Bog people, and then the Manitoba Key burial site. These are two burial sites. One of them's in a swamp in like mainland Florida. The other one is, I think they said, like 700 feet off the coast. So it's in the ocean.
Old coast.
So that means that it has to be before the last ice age or shift where the sea levels went up or down. So for that to be there, that means they buried them. They buried a group of people. There's no debating conspiracy theory.
They found the bodies. They're there.
There's like a shit ton of bodies. Well, I shouldn't have said that. They don't tell you where they are, and it's protected, and you're not allowed to go there, and they're not releasing what they found. So there is a lot of red tape. But they found it, and it's the same as one of these other sites. Wendover site they found in the 80s. And these were like dozens of people dead in a swamp that were buried like Vikings, and their European DNA.
Mm-hmm. And they're very well preserved. They still had hair, right?
Some of them, yeah.
Yeah,
and well, they had full brains. They had a full brain. So that's how they got all their DNA. 7,000 years old.
So we know it. Like, there's been so many different peoples here already.
Yeah.
So.
And when the French and Spanish got here, they saw, like I said, light, dark, yellow, brown-skinned. They saw a lot. But what they compared this one group of people to was Pict, which means like Celtic. It was like a Celtic tribe were the Picts, P-I-C-T. And they were very, very light-skinned, white-skinned, and they wore tattoos, like blue tattoos all over their body, like the Celtic did.
Right.
Celtic people did. And those were in Florida. And the guy that was engraving some of these, I'm going to keep sending them to you. The guy that was engraving these, Theodore de Bry, I think that's his name, it's definitely de Bry. When he engraved these, well, first off, he said that they were 8 feet tall, and I'm going to send that to you too. But he said that another one of the guys was 350 years old. One of the tribesmen that he was with. But then also, he said that some of the people that he met looked most like the Pict people of Ireland. So it was like, it was a melting pot back then.
Yeah.
You know? But here, I'm going to send you these.
Wild.
But I remember you saying earlier, you said, follow the money, and how, like, people retire and come to Florida. Like, before all that, like, what was bringing people, like, to Florida? Like, what was the allure of coming here?
That's the whole
This is the
question, is that it is kind of like a paradise now.
Mm-hmm.
And certain elements of it are very paradisical. Like, it is, very nice, very warm. But, like you're saying, some of these major cities were not here. So what was the appeal?
Exactly.
There really was no appeal to come down here unless you had a bajillion dollars to just build whatever you want. So we're told Key West, for example, which is the very, very bottom. There was no bridge, no train, to get there. But, maybe it's 1830. I think it's, 1830 for sure. 1830, because Florida becomes a state in 1821, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
By 1830, Key West is the richest city in America.
In less than 10 years.
Yeah. And
versus these
in 1820,
hyper-industrialized cities, Chicago, New York.
In 1821, there was not a single permanent residence in Florida. Sorry, in the Florida Keys. 1821. Florida Keys, there was not a single permanent residence. In 1830s, it's the richest city in America. And it's also the highest populated city in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And they say that money came from hunting treasure.
Yes, that it was just diving and finding gold or like piracy, like hitting licks on people in ships out in the ocean, pretty much.
So who do we think the pirates were?
Well, Robert Sepper on YouTube, he talks about, he posts some good stuff about like Skull and Bones Society, how the skull and bones of the pirates were like the same skull and bones of like secret societies, and that they weren't just like ragtag, dirty bums that were just, because that's kind of what we're shown in movies. Is that
they're just drunkard rejects of society,
and just like all disheveled. But they were actually very, very well financed mercenaries, and they were like legal. So if they were Spanish pirates, they were considered like part of the Spanish armed forces. Whereas if we were in America, we would call them pirates.
Mm-hmm.
And vice versa. Our ships would be labeled pirates by them. So there really are no like pirates.
They were all government shit. They were all paid by the government.
They're
basically.
all what's the word called?
Privateers.
Privateers. Yeah, a pirate is a privateer.
Mm-hmm.
So the privateers are these contracted like mercenaries that just go rob people
some
and
shit up,
cause havoc.
I've heard theories both ways that argue for and against their connection to secret societies, i.e. the Templars.
Now I know that there's a lot of people say that it has to do with Jewish people, because Christopher Columbus was Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yes.
What?
His birth name was Cristobal Colon, like colonialism. So here I sent you some
Cristobal,
where it talks about them being 350 years old and them being 8 feet tall. Did I send the same one twice? Or did
No, I got both of them. It's
Right.
crazy.
Nice.
It is crazy. They were definitely big.
Yeah.
We live in a magical state, folks. Magical.
Phoenicians. Here's a good one.
Yes.
So to tie it back into Phoenicians, we're talking about Columbus. Columbus came over with 150, 250 guys, 500, I don't know, but like a fucking small army, pretty much. And they were all Spanish. And it's no conspiracy theory. They had zero intention of doing like trade or like getting spices. Like that's what we're told. They were looking for like
the West
spices.
Indies, the Spice Road, the Silk Road.
And they came over with a full army and like no provisions or like storage for. They came over with like gunpowder and shit. And
right.
They they weren't coming to trade, so they came here on purpose. Not only that, they were all Spanish, like I said. Columbus, he's like Italian, Portuguese. Columbus is his Portuguese name. That's his fake Portuguese name. Cristobal Colon is, I think, his Italian name. And he was an Italian Jew, if I'm not mistaken. So a lot of the pirates' graves that are here in the Caribbean, and you can search videos, I don't have them on hand, but Robert Sepper puts them on his YouTube, where they're like the Jewish ancestors of these pirates like come back to the graves in like Jamaica and stuff, and they have stars of David
Jewish
etched on these. So and they have skull and bones next to like the Star of David. So that's the connection right there. And they always have, the skull and bones flag on the pirate ship in the movies. They probably didn't even fly that
Hell no.
in real life. But so where it ties in is that Columbus, they're all Spanish, except for one guy on the ship, his navigator. Now remember, the Greeks and the Romans could not travel the open seas. They didn't know how to.
Mm-hmm.
Only the Vikings and the Phoenicians. Well, the Phoenicians went to England and Britain and Ireland area to mine tin. That was one of their colonies.
Mm.
So the Phoenicians are, a lot of people, since the Phoenicians are descendants of the Atlanteans, the Celtic and Basque people of Spain are unrelated to any of the Indo-Aryan people of Eurasia.
Yeah, their genuses are their gene pools are isolated.
Yeah, they're different, and linguistically they're different too. They're not in the Aryan language group, and they're right up against the Atlantic Ocean. And then the Irish are right up against, west of England. They're right up against the Atlantic Ocean, and they would be the closest people to receive, survivors of Atlantis if Atlanteans were, heading that
It's
way.
also the Galatian coast or
Yeah.
Galatia in
And
Spain.
do you know where the word Portugal means?
Mm-mm.
Port to Gaul.
Gaul.
And Gaul is like France and Germany and even Britain, kind of, because Gaul is the same word as Gaelic,
Uh-huh.
Celtic. So those are all like Irish people, and the Irish
Interesting.
people say are some of the closest to the Atlantean, and then the Basque.
So who was the guide for Columbus?
So the navigator was an Irishman, and his last name was Harris, but he comes from Galway.
Mhm.
And Galway is significant because Galway, Ireland, is where they had like these 12, very similar to like Venice, like you were saying. They had these nobility families of Venice that like ruled the world through their trade empire.
Mhm.
Ireland had the same thing. They had the 12, some say it's 14, 12 tribes of Galway. And the 12 tribes of Galway were these master naval like tribes that went out from Ireland to around the world, allegedly, and they went like exploring. And this is kind of like the same, some people say that like King Arthur's knights went, that's kind of mythical, but they went off into the world and spread out with their boats. So it's kind of like the survivor of the Atlantis story or the 12 tribes of Israel story. It's the same like archetype where you have this naval empire is escaping something or spreading out to the world and bringing agriculture with them, especially.
Interesting similarities there.
So
What was the name of those people? Was it Finnegan?
Yes.
Yeah.
Nice. Good job. So those, the Finnegans,
The Finnegans.
is one of the most popular names from Ireland. One of the most recognized names. If someone hears Finnegan, then they think Irish. So the Finnegans are actually the Phoenicians.
It's the same name
Right.
structure there.
Yeah.
Everything ties together.
So when you get to Ireland, the phonetics change, and you get a lot of Gans, like Mulligan, Logan, Finnegan, Flanagan, Flanagans.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just kind of an Irish suffix. That's how they end their words. Whereas you go to, Latin or Spanish, and it's all ado, or ada, ado. It's just a different. That's phonetics. That's how.
So Columbus's guide was one of those people.
Columbus's
A
guide.
Phoenician Irish descendant.
Yes,
Something like that.
He was an Irish man. That's a fact. That's not a conspiracy theory. His navigator and allegedly, he met him like in a bar, and he told him, "I've been to a place across the Atlantic. I can take you there." But the issue was, people like historians today, they kind of debunk that and say, "Oh, well, he might have went across kind of like to Newfoundland, like Canada, where we know the Vikings went." So the only problem,
My issue with that. Go ahead, keep
What?
going.
the only problem with that is that's like the northern part, where they kind of say they follow the ice and just kind of make an easy trip over.
Still counts.
What they did was the complete opposite. They left Portugal, area, and went
Right, so they try to say,
straight
William
across.
Harris was full of shit because he was just doing the easy ice route, but
Yeah.
when in reality, I mean, he didn't use that
Yes.
easy ice route.
Yes. His navigator brought him exactly where they wanted to go.
Mm-hmm.
There was no mistake. So he had been there too, which means that there was probably some type of Irish people here or Irish expeditions here that had set the precedent where people could make that trip afterwards.
So yeah, what I was gonna say is my issue with the Newfoundland is like, come on, like they're coming from the iciest part, and as they go south, it keeps getting nicer. They stop at Newfoundland, or they
Yeah.
keep going because it keeps getting nicer.
You're right. You're right.
Stupid. Makes no sense.
And why Florida's very significant in this is that you have the Ohio River Valley culture and Mississippi River Valley culture. And these are like mound builders, great mound building societies that build these huge pyramids. Like we have big mounds in Florida. Some of them are really big, but the ones in Ohio are like as big, and Mississippi are as big as some of the pyramids in Egypt. They're just rounded off because they're possibly much older and they've been rained on.
Or
Doesn't-
destroyed.
Doesn't rain in Egypt, so those guys are kind of, stuck there. They only have to worry about the wind, which is going to take a lot more time to erode them. But that's something I was going to connect earlier on. I forgot to. The two flattest places in the world:
Mississippi.
Florida,
And the Nile River Delta,
yeah, that area, the Giza Plateau,
the Giza Plateau.
where the pyramids are built. It's one of the biggest anomalies because the entire bedrock is like shaved to like perfect 180 degrees flat because they had to build the pyramids on a perfectly flat base. Florida has a lot of that where the land is like 180 degrees flat for miles and miles and miles. So that makes Florida pretty special, pretty significant, and a good option for a place to build your pyramids. You don't have to worry about hills. But the Ohio River Valley culture, those are mounds. They're much more like serpent mounds where they have like these big snake-shaped, very trippy. And those guys are all over the place. And how it ties into the Phoenicians is that they had all this copper in that area. They were mining all the copper in like the Copper Age, Bronze Age.
the Bronze Age.
And they were taking out all this copper, but there's such little copper in the American archaeological, like fossil record. There's very little of that copper, even though we know a shit ton was mined out. And there's a lot of tin in that area too. But in Britain, which is where Britain gets its name from the tin mines, the Phoenician colony, and a lot of that tin's missing too, or it actually went over into Eurasia because it was getting transported by Phoenicians. Same thing happened in the Ohio River Valley. But why the Ohio River Valley is important to Florida is that they weren't coming down from the Hudson. These Vikings or Phoenicians, they weren't coming down from...
They weren't coming down the east coast of the U.S.
They were, but they would have to go down around Florida and go up through the Gulf of Mexico. So they were coming right here through Florida. So if the Phoenicians, if one of these sea peoples was transporting all this metal from the inland of America, from the Mississippi River, they would go up the Mississippi River, so they'd have to come through the Gulf, meaning they'd have to go around or through Florida.
Honestly, I don't think most people realize how fantastical the Mississippi River system is.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
it's so wide. What's up, baby?
As far as is concerned with conventional history, who were the Moors?
The Moors were told... It's all good. The Moors are the descendants of the Phoenicians. And we were talking about barbarians before. The barbarian is like a misnomer, but one that is still around today is Berber. So we still call those North African people the Amazigh. That's their technical name.
That's their real name?
That's what they like to be called, Amazigh. But like most people call them Berbers, and Berber comes from barbarian.
Right.
So the Berbers are these mixed, like this mixed race people that has a lot of this Atlantean DNA. But they also have a lot of African DNA, which is why they're different than the Phoenicians. Sorry, than the Finnish, the Vikings, who were stuck up to the Arctic people. And Arctic people look, kind of like me, like Finnish, right? Finnegan, Finnish. And the Finnish also fall into that category where their language does not match up to anyone else's. It's from the Urgic family, which is not Indo-Aryan.
Interesting.
Which is English. From Indo-Aryan means Aryan means Indo-European. It doesn't mean Nazi. It means Japanese. It means Persian. It means all these people that are descended from the horse people, these horsemen that traveled all across Eurasia. They went from Ireland to India. That's why Mater is mother in Germany, and Sanskrit in India, and Pater and Mutter, and
that's why they have so many common words.
And so Latin, Greek, even all these branches that are supposed to be different. But it's so blah blah blah. The Phoenicians basically the Moors.
The Moors' history in Europe culminates in Spain. Right.
So
that's as far as they got. They kind of like extended over the north coast of Africa, traveling, they're spreading their Islam, and they finally got to Spain because Rome had collapsed and left that vacancy. Yeah. So there they were in Spain.
Right. And what's funny is that the only two people that kind of swept over Rome and took over Rome were the Vikings and the Moors, who are both descended from the Phoenicians or the Atlanteans. And that's why their language doesn't match up with anyone else's, because, and I don't know much about Moorish language or Berber language, or I just don't. But where you have that Finnish language, English is the oldest language because it's the closest to Phoenician. It's like the modern Phoenician, and it doesn't belong to England. It belongs to angels. It's the Anglish. It's angular too. Our writing is angular, like print.
Interesting.
It's no nonsense. There's no script. There's no, if you're doing it right, you're printing these hard angles. Like an H is 4 90-degree angles. A T is, what is it? 2 90-degree angles, right? So, and even a circle is an angle in itself. So we have like a very printed, exportable. It's like a franchise where these sailors knew they'd be bumping into people that cannot speak what they're speaking. So they needed a language that replicates and takes advantage of how the human mouth works.
So the difference between the Phoenician script and English words is other languages, it's like a different symbol for complex ideas, and it's like you can't just say it. Like in English, each symbol represents one singular sound, and that's why it's so communicable and why it's easy to teach.
Yes. Because you can teach someone that ah is having your mouth open. You can teach someone that ooh is having your ooh, like an O, right? Makes sense?
Yeah.
And then that there's going to be local variation. So it's the only language that allows for that, where it gives a framework that can be adopted and shifted anywhere it goes. So that's why in Ohio and like Pennsylvania, you have these rune stones. And the rune stones are Viking language, Viking runes. And this is a predecessor to English. This is how you know English is the oldest, because you can trace it back to the 2 oldest languages in the world. It's the only language where you can trace it half back to that and half back to this. You can trace it back to Phoenician, because Phoenician is older than Hebrew. It inspired Hebrew, which became Greek, which became Roman, which became French, which became English. But then you trace it the other way back. You trace it, English is a Germanic language. So you trace it back to German, or the Dutch, to German, Dutch, and that brings you back to the runes, because German used to be written in runes. So right there you have English is the intersection point between these 2 timelines in history that kind of line up in the timeline we're given, but I don't think it's that simple. they were much older, and the Vikings are the Phoenicians. And they don't want to admit that because they don't want to admit that this one group was greater than the Roman Empire.
It's almost it's just like a hindsight is not always so 2020. If America were to cease to exist today, how many different cultures would they say existed, and how many would they say were adamantly related?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I have said that in, I think, one of the interviews I did. If they if civilization ended and they were like checking in on us 2,000 years from now, like digging up under the rubble, they'd be like, okay, the Georgians from Georgia, they were all black. It was a black society. Then they go up to Cape Cod and they dig up the bones, and it's like this was a European civilization. They must have had nothing to do. These guys listen to that music. They guys listen to that music. They must have had nothing. So we are probably very guilty of that today.
Absolutely.
Where we look at the Roman, and just because they're writing in Roman, that we think they could not have been the same people as the Greek who were writing Greek. Where I think a lot of people think the Roman Catholic Church sandwiched a lot of history together, or they tore a lot of history together to make a small people into a big enemy, justifying their actions in the stuff, the atrocities they did, which they did a lot of. So
let's go back to the Moors again.
For sure.
The Moors in Spain.
Yeah.
The Moors were kicked out of Spain during the Reconquista. The Catholics or the church, whatever, came down after Europe finally got back on its knees because the church was consolidating power in Europe, and they kicked out the Moors. It was like the same week that Columbus left to the New World.
It was.
That they kicked out the Moors.
It was.
So this high coincidence.
Yeah.
People like to think of Spain as being like this fully formed nation at that time, and it was just barely formed.
That's for real. They had,
and then all of a sudden they were going to go across the world.
Mm-hmm. They had just. You're exactly right. The spices would not have been high on the agenda at that point. They had just reconquered their homeland. Maybe. We don't even know that. But before the Moors came, and the Moors are dark-skinned people, before the Moors, Spain, which is very mixed today, was all Irish people, like the Basque. The Basque are, like blonde, blue-eyed, and they dress like...
That's who was living here.
Yeah, they dress like with the little beret, and they're very European. Even in like Portugal, which is very mixed today, the Moors had not come through yet. So those people were very different. Once the Moors came through, that whole group of people started looking very different. And that's where you get the Spanish,
the first mulattoes.
Yeah. And the Spanish people and Portuguese, they were this mix of Arabic and African cultures that had just, in like an instant, swept through Spain and up into France, even up into Germany a little bit. And Charlemagne repelled those guys, pushed them out of France, but they were still in Spain much, much later, almost 1,000 years later. So those guys were in Spain and were the Spanish royalty, and they built all these mosques, and they
the Moors.
They built Moorish architecture. Well, as soon as Spain fights them out and kicks them out back into Morocco across the Straits of Gibraltar, as soon as they kick them out, like you said, Columbus is like, I'm going to, hey, king, queen, can we just go on a voyage? And they're like, yeah, take all the men, take the money, even though you're Jewish. And after they kicked the Moors out, the Reconquista, as soon as they kicked the Moors out, they turned their sights on the Jews. And they start killing Jews and hanging Jews.
Mm-hmm.
So why did they let Columbus leave to go sail his own expedition with like 200 men? Why did they do that? Well, maybe he wasn't funded and given a blessing to go off. Maybe he was charged to go track someone down. He knew exactly where he was going. He didn't bump into Pennsylvania or bump in. He came right into the Caribbean and, he started killing people as soon as he got here. So they were waging a war, and that's not what you would do if you were just looking for spices.
So you're hypothesizing that the Moors escaped
Yes.
to the New World.
Yes. The Moors had either already been in the New World because they were descended from the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians had trading routes that went into, Ohio, like we were saying. But there's also the rune stones, which are up in Pennsylvania. That's a fact. There's rune stones up there, and runic and Phoenician are the same thing. They're a little changed around. The A may not be the A in both, but they're the same exact symbols, same exact type of phonetic use, where A is A, B is B, So the Moors, yes, they were either already in Florida, in the Caribbean, like Cuba, Jamaica, and Florida, of course, South Florida, or they had to escape, and they were going where they might have had some idea where they were going. Maybe they didn't. But there's a lot of Moorish stuff in Florida.
So yeah, I'm gonna bring it back to the whole Florida, because we've been going off on this little Moors,
We're trying to discover who these people were.
Yeah. So I know University of Tampa, like the buildings, it has a lot of Moorish influence. Would you say that, like, I don't know if they're connected, but like the tunnels underneath the city, is that?
Well, they're both red brick. The Tampa Bay Hotel, that's what it's called. That's what it was called.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's University of Tampa, or Tampa University. It's half red brick, half poured cement. The same stuff that Flagler was using. We don't know how that cement is made today. The original recipe's lost. So our cement is inferior today. It's terrible. It crumbles after like 30 years. So the cement that they were pouring in 1880s is still here today and extremely sturdy and extremely, sound. Whereas and it has red brick in it too. And there's not a lot of red brick stuff in Florida, so whenever you see it, it's kind of
Interesting.
very suspect. Cause why?
It's weird.
What are they using it for?
You see a lot of it in Ybor City too. A lot of those buildings down there are red brick.
It is. And it served a purpose that we don't really understand today. Where we're told, you would think it would be like, oh yeah, it's hurricane proof, But the hurricanes would come through and allegedly knock these down all the time. But the poured concrete, standing still. Coquina mix, they call it.
Right, Indian concrete. For me, the curiosity began when I just started asking myself, why did these Christian white men come down to Florida and build Islamic structures?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's where it first started for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of two options. It's either that those buildings were here already and were just rebuilt or repurposed, or these rich industrialists. Capitalist isn't the enemy, it's the industrialism. So the industrialists, the cronies that came down here, those guys, either that they were already here or they were mocking the people they had defeated.
So if if Americans did build these, it was to mock who was already here.
If they were built when we're told they were built, I see no reason why they would all think that Moorish was so stylish, because we're told that it's a leftover tradition from Spain, because the Spanish were conquered by the Moors, and despite them being conquered, supposedly they loved Moorish architecture, and they loved it so much that it rubbed off on Florida, and the English people that came after just inherited that and chose to build that.
All right. Do we have construction pictures?
So of the Tampa Bay Hotel, we do.
We do?
We do.
Okay.
It's strange, though, because when you're building a building, you go level up.
Mm-hmm.
you build a level, you go to the next level, and you go to the next level. With the Tampa Bay Hotel, they built an entire tower, like the spires with the cupolas at the top and the little like Islamic flagpole with the crescent moon at the top.
Uh-huh.
They built a whole half and then left like the other half of the building brick down, like just rubble on the ground. Like
So
not
you
built
sliced
up.
the building in half.
Kind
like,
of.
It was just like you could look into the floors that were already completed.
Yeah.
So to me, it looks like almost a demolition.
Yeah.
And a lot of
Kind
what I
of.
see construction of these old buildings is just like a bunch of scaffolding and some cranes around, but the structure itself looks pretty much complete.
And if you look around, you're right. If you look around a little bit, you'll see that like the angle where they take that one construction photo that shows half the building missing is like almost the exact same angle of a later photo where the building's completely finished. As if like the guy would have had it taken it from the exact same spot, or they're just doctored photos and they vanilla sky. That's kind of the technique that it's called, vanilla sky, where they just blotch the sky out where it's all white.
They basically turn the
And
sky into a green screen.
You can just enlarge the sky or encroach the sky onto the building and make it look like part of it's not there.
Right.
So with that one, I don't know. The earliest we see is half the thing built with a tower all the way constructed, and then the other half is not even started.
It looks like a completed thing.
Yeah.
Because
So-
that's just scaffolding around a completed tower.
It's either bombed, and what's strange is that the top, the like cap, the tippy top, the silver part, stainless steel. It's pure stainless steel. And a lot of time with those domes, it's like copper or bronze or something. Stainless steel is a weird choice. And a couple of the courthouses around Florida also use stainless steel in the same Moorish style. A lot of the courthouses have the same Moorish spire at the top. But I think St. Augustine, they call it ancient city.
Mm-hmm.
Ancient means something's at least like 1,000 years old. Well, it's not that old, St. Augustine, so how to get that name? Maybe it's a lot older. And Tampa Bay is a natural deep sea port, if I'm not mistaken. You can bring like these gigantic ships in.
Very deep
naturally.
water.
It's a deep water port, something like that. And I don't think the Keys is not like that. They had to build it. And Miami's not like that. They had to build it. St. Augustine, it's not like that. They had to build it. So I think it's the only part where it's that deep. So what they say, that's why it ties into Atlantis. Atlantis may not have been as far back as we think it is. It may just have been these sea people that knew how to cross. So while the Greek civilization was happening, the Persian was happening, they're stuck on land playing in their little sandbox. These empires are going back and forth between... And they may not have been empires like we think. They didn't have million-man armies. They were just very intelligent seafarers. So they could do a lot with a little, And that's all Atlantis might have been. Was guys on wooden ships.
Just very skilled at what they have, yeah.
But it probably was a lot of advanced technology, too. People aren't that far off with that.
And you were talking about these mounds earlier. From what I was taught, or from what I know, is that it was like they're like burial mounds. There's,
Yeah.
it wasn't used as like I guess, I don't know. I guess the pyramids aren't like there are burial. You only put like one person in there, but I guess these mounds have like more than
The pyramids weren't burial either. The pyramids were not.
Right. That's...
But
You-
we're talking about different peoples,
Yeah.
though.
You're right.
This is many thousands of years
You're
ago.
right, though. Like, they don't find bodies in pyramids almost ever. Like, 99% of the time they're buried around pyramids, and then they say, oh, yeah, it was in the pyramid, but it wasn't. It does fit in, though, because you'll always see, Rockefeller built one of his homes on top of a burial mound.
That's weird.
So it has to do with, like, ley lines, I think. Like the Bermuda, ley lines?
The energy lines of the earth.
Yeah, they're like the energy grid of the planet.
Yeah.
And I think, and a lot of people think, there's a major intersection over Florida, and that probably is what the Bermuda Triangle is.
Right.
And the Bermuda Triangle tips off the coast of Florida, like right up along. Some people say it's Jupiter, Florida. Some people say it's like Miami, but it's there nonetheless. So there is all that electromagnetic phenomena where shit goes missing. Planes just drop out of the sky, boats just sink. And some people think that might be ley lines, where there's all this energy that we're very ignorant of. So if you just sail like a very sophisticated ship into that, you're just asking for trouble. We have zero clue as to why. But another thing is the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream comes out of the Gulf of Mexico, this very warm water, and it goes all the way up into the Gulf of Finland.
Damn.
And that's what kept Finland from freezing during the Ice Age. And this is the Bok Saga. You ever heard of that? You guys should check out the Bok Saga.
Make a note.
But
we'll see.
that's where like the Finnish people come into this. Cause
The water's directly going to them.
yeah. So it's this warm water, and it's kind of like a highway. Like they could hop on and come down to Florida.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and vice versa.
Direct path.
Kind of like the sea turtles and like Nemo. Like,
Because don't they have palm trees up in like weirdly up in that area?
well, it is the Gulf Stream. You're right. It is the Gulf Stream, but I don't think it's in Finland. That's like that's a little bit more north and east. But in the like southern Isles of England, of Britain, they have these like tropical islands.
That's
where
crazy.
it's not tropical, but
Because it's just in the middle of that warm water.
the-
Wow.
the
that
warm water
stream.
prevents like winter from killing.
That's honestly, the Gulf Stream is what keeps Europe alive. Without it, there would be no agriculture there.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
So the other structures that might be Moorish. Let's look at one that really fascinated me was the Star Fort and the Dry
Yeah.
Tortugas.
Oh yeah.
Massive.
Yeah.
Massive. I believe you said
It's
it was
huge.
the largest brick structure in North America.
It might be the Americas.
The
Like
Americas.
both the Americas.
It is
But
built
definitely-
basically on the water.
When was it made?
Allegedly
know
for
this.
the
But
Spanish-American
it's
War.
like 1830s, 1840s.
For what purpose
around
do we
there,
say?
Right before the Civil War.
Looks like a garrison.
Yeah, because the Spanish American War hadn't happened yet. But
we were just getting ready for it, so we
but
built
yeah.
this massive thing.
tensions were high, especially with like piracy, and everyone was trying to fight over the Caribbean. But why were they? There's like not much going on here.
Treasure, sunken stuff, right?
But 1830, 1840, like a lot of that piracy stuff was going on in Key West, so all that money was happening. And Key West was actually taken over by like a government dictator, like a Navy officer that just like enacted martial law. and just
Somebody went crazy. This is
took
all
over.
mine.
And it was kind of like I don't know if I can say the C word. I don't want to get you guys demonetized.
We're not there yet on YouTube.
I
It's
can
like,
cut out anything, man.
COVID.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
So COVID, it's kind of like COVID. They're like, in the name of protection,
Oh,
we
okay.
get to take away your rights. So they're like, there's all this piracy going on. So we're going to come down here and we're going to make everything okay.
That's
So
hilarious.
they put like a curfew. They controlled everyone. And they literally call it like, it was a state dictatorship where this guy was
How long did that last?
a couple of years at least.
My
Damn.
God, it would be Key West if that
Yeah,
happened.
it's so
just so
stuck
far
off,
away. Yeah.
So what was he doing? You know, he might have been erasing a lot of this history. He might have been punishing the people that were telling the true history, and he wanted to get them on to the, adapted colonial new timeline.
But this fort, we never used it, right?
That one was never used, if I'm
never
not mistaken.
freaking used.
Yeah,
The
and
biggest thing. It was
they-
never used.
It's only
never-
got to take a boat to get there. Like it looks like there's no other
Yeah.
way.
And
they-
it's hella engineered.
Yeah.
Well engineered.
They never finished it, And it has these cisterns inside where the
Right.
the walls are all hollow and have these sophisticated like filtration systems. And they say that it's like when the first guy went over there to survey it, they were like, "There's no water. There's no point. It's bad land. You would never want to build a fort here. So just move on." Like 5 years later, they decide to build the biggest fort they've ever built in that exact spot. Even despite the warnings that it was not a good spot. So they put all this money into it. They build this brick fort. They never even finish it. It was never even finished. So it's just sitting there. And with a lot of the forts, they're along like the major ports. So you'd be like, okay, well, it's a star fort. Star forts are like, the no kill zone, or they have maximum kill zone. That's the whole point of being tipped, where there's nowhere to hide if you're attacking. And they're along major ports and major rivers and estuaries and stuff. So it makes sense that they're, sea forts. But that one
In the dry
is
Tortugas.
in the middle of nowhere on an island that if you were an attacking army, it doesn't matter if you had 1,000 ships, you would not even have to sail by that. You could sail around it pretty easily. And people say, oh no, they get channeled in and funneled in because it's the only navigable. No, it's literally 90 miles away. I think 70 miles away from anything close.
I'm just trying to think, like, was Spain even that big of a threat that we need to put so much resources into defense?
This is in like the Keys area,
And it makes me question Fort De Soto right over here.
Oh yeah,
I've been on Egmont Key. Yeah, like
look at
Egmont Key.
those. Is Fort Dade over here too?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Do you guys know about Siesta Key?
on Sarasota.
Just what,
Yeah.
the sand?
The sand, yeah.
Yeah.
99%.
I watch your
Quartz
videos, bro.
crystal. Cool. Nice. But yeah, that shit's trippy because that sand is 4 million. I think it's either like 7 million or 4 million. It's right around there. 5 million year old sand.
Oh my God.
That's from like North Carolina. And it's all just collected, deposited in this one spot inside Tampa Bay or just south of Tampa Bay. And it's just sitting there, and it's 99% quartz crystal. So normal sand is coral, crushed up shell. This is none of that. It's literally 99% quartz crystal. It's not hot when you walk on it, and it makes a noise. It squeaks when you walk on it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like that resonance. Like it shows that it's
It's active.
sensitive.
It's vibrating.
Sensitive to sound, you know?
That's how
Yeah.
kind of Clearwater Beach's sand is like that a little bit.
And that's why it's called a Clearwater. And it's not the only place like that, but it's the most popular and like has the biggest, nicest beach. But there
I haven't
are...
been there.
Yeah.
Siesta Key, I haven't been
Me
there.
neither, I don't think. Did we? We could talk about what we were doing today a little bit, about the stone anchors.
Yes, I want to get to that too.
Okay. Make sure. I want to get that in.
He said that there were stone anchors over in California as well.
Of course.
San Francisco.
Probably. It's not.
Well,
Florida.
he was talking about Ming Dynasty anchors,
Maybe. There were Chinese people too in California.
the West Coast.
You know, I try and like stay focused on
On
Florida.
Florida.
Like I don't want to cover anyone else's.
You know John
turf.
Levi?
Yeah.
I
like
discovered
him.
him a little while ago.
Yeah, he's good.
But he's a little less. He rambles a lot. I don't know. It's hard to follow what he says sometimes.
He can be a little like very slow paced.
Yeah.
But
We were talking about Siesta Key. That's in Sarasota, and that's
Is
where
it?
Ringling built his mansion,
by
his
there.
thing.
The Venetian.
What were you gonna say about that in regards to the elephants?
So the elephants in Sarasota, thank you.
Yeah.
In Sarasota, the elephants, there's a rule, a law, that you're not allowed to park your elephants.
Right. Yes, I heard.
Something like that.
I heard that in. That's the same in Miami too. They had
Yeah.
laws for parking elephants.
Yes, and
Yep.
that's what someone commented to me that I had never heard before, and that turns out to be true, that there are these laws about like elephant riding.
When I heard about that on your video, I was like, man, how did we get so many elephants? Like, how were they getting elephants? What was the logistics of it back then? It's like, was it just that many fucking rich people trying to get an elephant?
Yeah, and they're all Asian.
They're Asian
The
elephants,
ones
right?
in Florida, for the most part, were Asian elephants, from what I can see, especially the ones in Miami. But you'd think there'd be more African ones because Africa's right there.
Yeah.
But there were Asian ones. And we also, I'm no fossil expert, but I know we have the most, some of the most elephant and mastodon bones
In Florida.
of like the world.
You don't really hear about fossils being found here though a lot.
No,
ever.
they keep that shit shut up. They don't.
Why?
Because Florida is the first city in America. St. Augustine is the first continuous city in America.
Mhm.
So that is like the starting point for this whole fake book that they wrote. So
I guess.
if they're writing a fake ass book, they have to start with a fake ass beginning, you know. And Florida is kind of that beginning. People talk about like Jamestown, like, you know, Virginia and like North Carolina.
Roanoke and shit.
Colonies. But supposedly those didn't like turn out to be anything. Whereas St. Augustine, you had stone structures, kakina structures already being built, like this big, glorious like city. And so Florida was already up and running.
Popping.
Yeah.
So we find these fossilized elephant bones in our rivers and shit, and at the same time, in old Florida, there's all these fucking elephants. So it makes you, you know, were they already here?
Yeah, and is a mastodon bone so much different from an elephant bone? And who the fuck would know unless you're a
Right.
elephant
Here's that
expert.
picture in Miami of
Yeah.
them parading the elephants across the Venetian Causeway.
Yeah, so that's in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
The one where they're playing golf with the elephants on Miami Beach, like right up against the ocean.
What's the point of them having the elephants? Like, why? What was? Is this a show status?
That's what people were saying.
Some of them were used for
That
construction.
you were just like rich. You had a
Some of them were used for labor.
That's the trippiest shit too, is that they were like using them as physical labor, which if you had $1 million pet, which is kind of, I don't know how much they went for back then, but you know, you get an elephant today, it's like $1 million bucks just to take care of it.
Right.
They had these elephants and then they were working them, like making them lift heavy ass shit, you know.
Yeah, they can do it.
And they helped build Miami. Miami Beach was in part built by elephants.
Oh, so it's pulling a little rolling pin there.
So those are in the 20s and earlier.
Yeah.
Those are even earlier than the bridge, the guys on the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why not?
If there were so many of them.
And another thing is that you don't have to, you know, maybe I can't prove that they were native to Florida. They don't have to be. The Romans had war elephants. And
The Carthaginians brought across a continent.
Exactly. So the Carthaginians brought them up into,
and they were Phoenician.
into Europe too, and they are Phoenicians. So they had boats that had elephants on them. They could have brought elephants here. The Spanish ended up fighting the descendants of those guys. There might have been an elephant or two that made it across the Atlantic. It's not ridiculous. And
No, not at all.
another thing is that the horses. So within horses are like, you know, native, supposedly come from Eurasia, like China maybe, or
Right,
you
yeah.
know, the steppe.
Yes.
But where they're actually in America, as soon as they're introduced, within a couple, I think this is beeping a little bit. As soon as they're introduced, you have like the American racehorse, and I don't know horse breeds, but you have all these American horse breeds that are like very, very different than the ones from Eurasia. So what if the horses were here? Because they've done stuff like this before. Something's like beeping or scratching.
Maybe put that on the floor.
I know, like, that Ocala area, there's a bunch of horse farms up there. Like, when you start heading towards North Florida, there's horse farms everywhere.
Florida is almost... it's like a well-kept secret.
It really is.
Because there's so much surprising shit that you would never think about Florida, because the image of Florida we're given is a dirty swamp.
Mm-hmm.
It has the highest concentration of freshwater springs in the world. Fresh, crystal clear, like quartz, crystal clear water that is good for you, healing, and people used to heal. That's another conspiracy.
I watched the healing water
The
videos.
healing,
The fountain of youth.
the Florida. I'm gonna do a better one about that and really go into like the industry involved,
Mm-hmm.
where people were coming down by the thousands to come stay in Florida just to swim and drink that water. And
Spring tourism.
that was huge until the Great Depression. So up until 1929, then everyone lost their money and the Florida housing market collapsed, which it always does, and that's what triggers the American financial collapses, is the Florida housing market every time.
That's
Goddamn
It's been
Florida.
3 times. This is going to be the 3rd. Because, it's so expensive to live in Florida now. It's insane.
It's gonna
a
happen.
lot of people moving here too.
So let's get to what brought you across the state.
Yeah, so I'm in Tampa because my girlfriend and I have gone over to meet John Saxer, who's a archaeologist. He's a wise man. He's a sage. He's a storyteller. He's like a mythologer. And he's royalty in my eyes. And he's like one of the most interesting people I've ever met or even heard about. So when I got to meet him, it was very, very cool. But I saw his videos, and he basically has discovered these ancient giant stone anchors that are undeniably stone anchors. They're limestone. They're huge. The biggest ones are 15,000 pounds on average. They're like 4,000 or 5,000 pounds, maybe. The ones we were looking at fell in that range.
Yeah, they look absolutely fucking massive. And they're like half into the ground, so like...
Did I send you the video?
Yeah, I have the videos here.
Okay, cool. So those are some of the ones we were looking at today.
Mm-hmm.
And those holes are drilled through those things. And those are thousands of years old.
Mm-hmm.
And they're fucking huge. Us 3...
No way.
Even if we had 10 guys to help us, Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime, 10 of them could not lift that thing. Okay? Those are so big that they would have had to be, as he says, Saxer says, aliens. He's been very influenced by like the ancient alien movement, He was kind of at the forefront of that. Like he knows Zechariah Stitchin.
He knows.
He knows he knows a lot of those guys. So that's kind of like the vocabulary he uses. There's also the Tartarian people who would probably be saying that this is like free energy device or anti-gravity device where they can cancel the gravity, and it doesn't matter how big a stone is, you can use it for whatever. So we can't lift them. Even if you had a crane, you couldn't put these on a boat and drop it out of a boat and pull it back up. You know what I mean? Even if you had a crane to move it, to get it onto a boat, how big is that fucking boat going to be to have a 15,000 pound anchor, 10,000 pound anchor?
What the fuck?
So,
And a lot of them.
yeah. And he says 2,000 that he's seen personally. He's counted
In the Tarpon Springs area?
No, well, just the west coast of Florida.
Oh, the west coast of Florida.
So like Tallahassee down to, and Bristol, where the other guy said the Garden of Eden video.
Because Mr. Saxer lives in Tarpon Springs.
Mr. Saxer lives in Tarpon Springs, just northwest of you guys a little bit.
Hop and a skip.
Yeah. And he's awesome. He's so funny. We've been like smoking pot, and he's hilarious. He's awesome. And he just brought us around to some of the ones that he knows where they are. He's been studying this for like 30 years. And he took us to those, and my mouth was like dropped open.
So what does he say that these stones were?
He says they're...
Obviously they were like a boat, but...
He says they're giant alien people. Whether that was like biblical giants or Anunnaki from the sky.
Mm-hmm.
they're different than us. They're different than you and I. It wasn't just a racial difference. These were like, these are the people that people were calling gods because they were different. They were titans. They were so big. And there's remnants of that. I showed you, even if that guy's 8 feet tall, if the average height was 5'8", 5'7",
We found skeletons bigger.
even if you're 8 feet tall, you're a fucking giant.
Yeah.
There's probably a lot more skeletons bigger than that.
Yeah.
So we know there's some giant skeletons in Florida. It's not ridiculous to think that these giant skeletons were making the giant boats out of the gopher wood that only grows here. That is related to Noah's Ark. But also they could have been aliens. There's not a lot of evidence for spaceships or stuff like that. We don't really see that, but the anchors are there and they're huge.
Mm-hmm.
And I can, pretty firmly, I can say that those are Atlantean.
Where else have anchors like this been found in the world?
Bimini, the Bahamas, and then all across the Mediterranean and like the Black Sea and all across there. The only difference is those are all much more recent and they're a couple 100 pounds maybe.
Mm-hmm.
He says those are on average 300 pounds. And I put videos of those, pictures of those smaller guys. I put those in the video so you can see those have very small holes. And they're like a cinder block. They're like they might be as big as like a backpack,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe a big duffel bag. But those are heavy as shit too,
These ones look like they're just in like neighborhoods and like just around.
They are.
It was in a person's yard.
And what's trippy is that
because they can't move it.
That's
yeah. They're pretty much all close to the water, which he thinks means that they were docked, that they were ships that were docked at the harbor, and then a flood came, some type of destruction, and the anchors just kind of got
left behind.
pushed up, further up, and everything else got swept out to sea.
Mm-hmm.
But the anchors are so heavy, they just sat there on the ground, and a couple thousand years later, they're just sitting in driveways, and those aren't moved. Most of those are just built around. The road will go, and I only sent you 3 videos. You're gonna see,
like it's in a median. It looks like there's a road sign right in front of it.
yeah.
Wild. Looking forward to when that video comes out. That's gonna be cool.
I saw you made a rap song here on there too. That was hot rap.
What? I didn't know that.
That was my assistant actually.
Oh, I thought it was like like a diss.
No, my assistant posts for me.
Gotcha.
So
Anything else you wanted to get to before we ask you our famous question? Not that famous. It's all right.
Famous for us.
You're gonna ask me, but it might be what you're gonna ask me. But what experiences have you guys had out here? Anything weird? Whether it's a building that you felt off about, or
I've had a lot.
or a Sasquatch,
I've had a lot.
No Bigfoot. I've never had a Bigfoot experience.
I've just had like paranormal
Yeah.
stuff.
I just seen a UFO one time.
Ghosts. Just weird feelings, out of body experiences when I'm in a building and shit like that. That's really it. And then I've seen one UFO, which I think it was a UFO. I was just, and I'm looking out. I'm on my phone. I look out my window, and this is like 6 o'clock, so like the sun's still up. And I saw like a little green light just like zap throughout the air and just disappear. And I was just thinking at first it was like maybe someone with a laser pointer, but I'm like, it's broad daylight, and it was, for how big it was to me, it could have been, even bigger in the sky.
Were there clouds?
No clouds,
No
clear
clouds.
day.
There was nothing for the laser to have bounced off of. If
And
it
then
was a laser.
I went back and Googled green lights in sky in Tampa. And then back in like the 70s, there was like a lot of sightings of like green lights in the sky in Tampa.
That's it's funny you say that, because these anchors, the guy that saw them, the guy that's found them, is in Tarpon Springs, and most of these are in Tarpon Springs. In Tarpon Springs, maybe it was Opelika, actually, sorry. It was Opelika.
Mm-hmm.
there was like one of the biggest alien sightings or UFO sightings ever, where they had like a dozens of cross-referenced accounts of UFOs, where this, I forget the name, but it was a school in Opelika, Florida, and they saw lights in the sky, alien ship come down. And I'm not huge into aliens, like that's not really my thing. Like I think I'm an astrologer, so I try and boil things down to like a lot of it's allegorical. If something comes from the stars, it's maybe not a ship coming from the stars, it's knowledge coming from the stars, like astrology and like astrotheology. But blah blah blah. Does that mean that UFOs have to be from space? No, they could just be advanced technology, whatever it is. Like the Hindu texts, the Vedic texts, like these old sagas, mythologies talk about spinning wheels, like spinning flying discs, saucers.
The gods riding fiery chariots across the sky.
Yeah. And that's actually what chakra means, is spinning wheel too.
Mm-hmm.
So what if, a flying saucer doesn't have to be like a spaceship, It's just like an energy vehicle. But they had all these lights come down in Florida, and they saw them in Opelika, and a couple people saw them at first, and they like were getting called crazy, kind of. Then a couple days later, or maybe it was the next day, the entire school sees UFOs, lights in the sky,
Like broad daylight type shit. Yeah, it was middle of the day. That's why I kind of like discounted it at first, and then I went back and did some Google, and I was like, oh, so yeah, that was.
Damn.
But yeah, so this is the closing question we have for every guest that comes on here.
Sure.
Have you ever had any type of paranormal, UFO, unexplained, situation happen to you? If so, please explain.
Yeah. I remember my brother and my dad were driving home one time, and they said they had seen a UFO, and I thought it was crazy. I was like 12 or something. But they swore that something was like flying over their car, like they could see it through the sunroof or something. But when I was 15, I was telling you guys earlier, I was out on like a golf course, kind of, or like a playing field, like these big, like almost like polo fields, wide open fields. And I was there with some friends, and we were just sitting, like looking up at the stars and stuff. And there was there's UFOs right now. The alien interference. But we saw something, a light in the sky that zipped so fast, so big, it could not have been anything. It could not have been a plane, a helicopter, nothing.
What did it look like? Like, explain the colors.
It looked like a disc. It looked like a ball of light. It was a star, but like 100 times thicker.
Mm-hmm.
So it looked like almost like a stage light far away, like a bright light. And it zipped so fast, it was covering like hundreds of miles in the sky. I don't know. Just ridiculous. And it was me and 3 friends that all saw it together. We were like crying because it was so fucking scary. We were like, what the fuck is that thing doing? And at the time, I thought it was, aliens, like strictly aliens. We went running home, and my friend's dad was a conspiracy theorist. And he had like alien experiences too. So his reaction was so weird. He was like, I know about aliens. And he gave me like a speech about aliens and UFO technology. And from there on, I was like hooked on this stuff too. Mm-hmm. But I really gravitated away from aliens, and there's a lot more rational, even outside of the mainstream. There's more rational explanations for what aliens could be, But yeah, I saw those guys when I was like 15. Saw that thing zipping around, and it was 3 other friends too.
It's a very intense.
And I could text them right now and tell them tell you that they saw the same exact shit.
It's wild.
That's fucking crazy.
Well,
shit.
All right.
That was a crazy journey.
Thanks.
Great talk.
through space and time.
Daniel and Derek. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, bro.
You guys are on the list now.
On the list for for being watched.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You're on the watch list now.
Whatever, it is what it is.
I was on the watch list since I watched your videos.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing. You're putting other people on the watch list with you.
We're all going down together.
It is what it is.
All right, everybody. That was Dr. Narco Longo.
Dr.
Why don't you go
Narco
ahead
Longo.
and tell them where they can find you one more time?
Old World Florida on YouTube, and old_world_Florida on Instagram.
All right,
That's
guys.
it.
Follow my guy. Check him out. His shit's fire.
Check it out. Peace, everyone.
All right.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Yeah.